Of all the films I've shot so far, none have had me more confused or more uncertain whilst planning and shooting than Ilford Ortho Plus. Being the only readily accessible true orthochromatic film, it's an incredibly unique stock with a contrasty, distinct, really classic kind of black and white look. I really enjoyed shooting with it, and I'll just say right off the bat here that I can't wait to shoot with it again, though only in certain styles of photography. One of the most important attributes of a black and white film is its spectral range, the range of light from the colour spectrum that it's sensitive to. And of the currently available black and white stocks as far as spectral range is concerned, there are 4 different categories of film, with each of these categories cutting off at different points in the colour spectrum and each with their own unique looks. Now this video isn't about all of the types of film, so I'm not going to go into too much detail. All you need to know is that most black and white stocks are panchromatic, which means they're sensitive to the full visible spectrum. But Ilford Ortho Plus, as we've established, is an orthochromatic film, and orthochromatic films have by far the most limited spectral range. Though when first introduced in the late 1800s, it was the exact opposite. Orthochromatic films had the widest spectral range and were the dominant category of film. Even with the early introduction of panchromatic films at the start of the 1900s, orthochromatic films held on to their popularity because they were easier to shoot, easier to process, and significantly cheaper, which resulted in a lot of early cinema and early mass photography being shot with orthochromatic stocks, forever tying its look with that time period. Now, in the datasheet, Ilford recommends shooting Ortho Plus in portrait and landscape photography settings. But me being me, I followed that brief, and then I didn't. These rolls were shot on a trip to Melbourne and around Victoria a few months back, and being there, naturally, I began shooting with my good friend Alex from Decaffeinated Photography. The practical logic to follow when shooting Ortho Plus is that because of the limited spectral range cutting off in the oranges, reds go dark. Reds will be underexposed and everything else relative to the reds will be effectively overexposed. And it's with that in mind that Alex and I initially approached this film. We're going to walk around through town and get some shots, finding some red.
If we include red in the images, we could actually get to showcase what ortho is all about.
Most of our compositions that afternoon were determined by the presence of any shade of red. Be it in a brick, the autumn leaves, or a car, we shot it. Reflecting on it now, I don't really think that was the best way to showcase Ilford Ortho Plus. Sure, we got some interesting images, but I just don't think it was the right use case. Which comes with no surprise because, like I said, Ilford's datasheet recommends shooting portraits and landscapes, not suburban photography. Though luckily, by the end of the day, we grew tired of these pictures and decided to take some portraits of each other and of my friend Keanu, who joined us for the afternoon, and then finally finishing off the day in Alex's studio with even more portraits. And that was a really good way to end the day because it provides the perfect segue into talking about skin tones, which are very different for this film. In general, I found that it makes the complexion a little bit darker, making the skin very contrasty in a sharp, detailed kind of way. And tied together with a minimal grain, it's a very strong look that complements male portraiture. Unfortunately, I didn't take any female portraits with these rolls, but the next time I shoot Ortho Plus, that's something I'm planning on exploring. There's a lot of fun to be had with makeup, and shooting in a studio would be really fun to get that classic kind of Hollywood look. Anyways, for those curious, we shot on Alex's Autoboy Super, his Yashica Flex Model A, and I, as ever, had my EOS 3000 in hand, but I saved most of that roll for the following days where I'd be in central Victoria in a small town called Castlemaine that was really the ideal location to look at the tonality of this film. As I said earlier, the orthochromatic look is heavily tied to the early 1900s, and that really complements the older style of architecture in Castlemaine. Not only that, but I think these pictures do well to showcase the strengths and the style of Ilford Ortho Plus, which really comes from the tonality and the contrast of the film and how that interacts with the spectral range. In a picture without any reds, the overall contrast of Ortho Plus is pretty neutral. It's not particularly flat or contrasty, the shadows don't go too dark, and the sky is more of a washed out white than a highlighty white. But this neutral look changes drastically whenever you include wavelengths in the scene that are outside of the spectral range, creating deep and dark shadowed areas. Humans are very used to the typical behavior of light, and any contradiction to that feels a bit strange. It just changes the way in which you look at the photograph. That wouldn't be the case with a typical panchromatic image. And I do realize that now would be the perfect time to show a panchromatic and orthochromatic image side by side comparing the effect, but I didn't take one of those pictures, so you're just gonna have to trust me or look at the video yourself and form your own opinion. But yeah, I guess the questions that arise from here are, do you even want this look, and when is it appropriate? Personally, I don't think I've figured that out yet. I've still got to try and shoot a little bit more of Ilford Ortho Plus, but I think I came close to at least starting to answer those questions with my final few shots of my final roll of Ortho Plus that I captured on a morning walk through a pine forest with my uncle and my little cousin. It was quite dark in the shade, and that proved to be a bit of a struggle with an 80 ISO film. I had no choice but to shoot at my widest aperture at f2 at the slowest shutter speed that I could handle, and even with that, every shot I got was just a little bit underexposed. Though luckily this film has enough latitude to handle it, but not without making the images quite dark and moody, which luckily enough I really quite liked, and I think really worked for these images. This photo in particular is now up there as one of my all-time favorite pictures that I've taken on film. It's not technically perfect by any means, but it's very intriguing in its composition and substance. And its tonality is just crazy. I really like it. But yeah, like I said, that's where I finished my experience of shooting Ilford Ortho Plus. That's it. That's my whole Ilford Ortho Plus experience done. The uniqueness of this film with its spectral range and low ISO forces your hand and makes you shoot in an entirely different way than you would typically, and that makes it an incredibly interesting film to shoot with that can lead to some positive results, but it can also lead to a few disappointing shots, as it did for me. There's quite a few images that didn't make the cut for this video because they just didn't really highlight what Ortho Plus is all about, and for me these images really go to show that Ilford Ortho Plus isn't really an all-round type of black and white. It's very specific in its look. Of course, as ever, these reviews are based on my limited personal experience, so I definitely recommend giving Ortho Plus a try out for yourself if you haven't shot with it before. And if you have any tips, experiences, or questions related to shooting this stock, or if I got anything wrong, please let me know in the comments down below. It's truly the best way for all of us to learn together. As I mentioned throughout this video, I do plan to revisit Ortho Plus, and when I do, I'm hoping to use some of the comments in these videos to guide my experience. And to be the first to see that video whenever I get round to making it, make sure to subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. Give this video a like if you liked it, give this video a like if you disliked it, share it, do all the YouTube things. Other than that, I will see you in the next video where I'll be talking about cameras and stuff. Probably. Definitely.